Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 53 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're glad to have you with us today. And today's topic, Scott, is a time for choosing vision over Egypt.
Yeah, we called it a time for choosing, not because we're trying to invoke 1964's great speech by Ronald Reagan, but I just love this concept, AJ, of really that you have a choice. And just like the Israelites did in the desert on how they wanted to move forward, and you today, I mean, this is the desert of COVID-19, and it's a moment that I think it's certainly not caught God by surprise, AJ.
Mm-hmm.
And dare I even say, I mean, I'm afraid to say this out loud, but I think it might be true. I'm not trying to say that God sent a pandemic, but he's certainly allowing it to happen and certainly allowing it to work something in us. And I think that we have a choice to make in how we're going to respond to this moment. So many people have experienced so much devastation. I don't want to say that God did that to anyone or anything like that. But I do think that God is allowing this moment to happen and watching how we're going to respond. And I think that you as a church leader or a pastor, it's a time to choose. It's time to choose how you're going to respond to this. And we want to choose vision. We want to choose the promised land. We don't want to choose the desert.
Well, God was waiting for a choice to be made, right? With the Israelites, the sooner they made the right choice, the sooner they were going to get to the promised land.
Yeah, that's right.
It took a long time for them. And, you know, the Bible, more so people, talk about the wandering of Israel in the desert as if they were just by themselves, you know, and then all on their own, they came to the conclusion that, hey, maybe we should trust God. And no, God was with them day and night. They had a column of smoke in the day and fire at night. God led them from place to place, sometimes into conflict, just to show himself how he could overcome that. Mm-hmm. And here we are in this COVID experience now in the church. Many churches are paralyzed. And they're acting as if, you know, here we are in the desert. Almost this folk theology, I think, that we've adopted of the Israelites in the desert. And now we're applying it to ourselves. Well, in the desert, nothing we can do but wait on God. God wasn't waiting for anybody except to make the choice for him. Are we going to be in that position now that we won't be making the right choice for God? And instead looking back and going, wow, things were really better in Egypt, weren't they? Was it that great then? Was our church doing so well then that we look back at it and go, that was the point in time in which, boy, we really had it going, didn't we?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that the desert happens to all of us sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice. But how long we stay there,
yes,
to a large degree is a choice. And you're right. The Israelites were kept there largely by choice, by the series of choices that they made, and it was never God's intention for them to spend so many decades in that moment. And yet, and we look at that, I think, and go, wow, how ridiculous. Why didn't they choose to move forward? And yet here we are today in 2020, and churches are making that choice to say, man, I'm waiting for certainty. I'm waiting for the sure thing. I'm waiting for normal. And so as a result, by default, we're choosing to stay in the desert versus moving into vision. So let's dive straight in.
Let's do it. So the first thing we're gonna kind of point out today is that Egypt looks good in the rearview mirror, but death was the reality. For the Israelites, going back to Egypt, they couldn't walk back over there, knock on Pharaoh's door and go, all right, we're back. Let's just go back. Can we pretend like this never happened?
Yeah.
We'll make some bricks for you. We'll eat the pomegranates and it'll all be good. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh wasn't going to let things go back to the way they were. They probably would have just been slaughtered when they got within, sight of the place, or life would have been a whole lot worse than it used to be.
Right.
And, for us today, our churches, many of our churches, especially
Well,
in
and
the
was that
United
even a good option? I mean, even like, you know what I mean? Like you were slaves.
States.
Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, like just take off the table. Maybe assume Pharaoh would have let things go back to the way they were.
Yeah.
What they were slaves.
Best case scenario was a life of slavery.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, today churches are going, man, I just wish normal would show back up. Normal was killing the church.
Mm.
It was. And anybody who thinks differently doesn't remember 6 months ago.
Yeah. Right.
80% of churches are plateaued or declining before the pandemic. We've said it before, COVID-19 did not kill the church. It was declining beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when we look back in that rearview mirror and go, man, I'm looking for normal.
Yeah.
I know what we mean by that. I know what you mean, but to take some of the good things to go back to normal would also mean to be going back to some of those destructive things.
The second thing that we want to say today is that a lack of action is not an option.
Mhm.
So you can't choose to just sit around paralyzed during COVID. The
Yeah.
world is going to keep moving. The world moves on from you every day. And the world has been moving on from a lot of churches for a lot of decades as well. The church has been in sort of a desert prior to COVID. Now it's just brought it to your doorstep and maybe made it the reality that it needed to be a long time ago. But the world is constantly changing, and going back is not an option, and sitting still is not an option either. That too will lead to death.
That's such a good point. I don't know if anybody who's listening follows John Acuff. Do you follow John Acuff online, AJ?
Somewhat, not as much as I used to, but
So
sorry, John, you're
sorry.
great. Probably a listener of the podcast.
Oh, for sure. You know that John Acuff listens to our podcast. But he said, people keep calling this the new normal, but it's not the new normal. It's the super weird. And I think that that's totally true. Like,
Yeah.
there are things about this season and this moment that are not the new normal. They are super weird. And there's this false dichotomy, I think, in the church space that, well, I either need to wait for normal, what we used to do,
Mm-hmm.
or I need to make camp in the super weird.
Yeah.
And those are not your two choices.
Mm-hmm.
There is another choice, and that is to build a new future in the promised land.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't want people to listen to this and go, well, if I'm not waiting for normal, you're telling me I have to just be content with the super weird and the wilderness? Of course not. That's the exact opposite. We're saying your choice, the antithesis, or the thing that should come after this is not what you used to do. It's something completely new. It's something completely different.
And so let's just segue into number 3, Scott, because we're headed there anyway. What lies ahead is better than what was behind. So there is a path out of what did he call it? The super weird?
He called it the super weird. Yeah.
So the super weird, AKA the desert, has a path out of it. God had a path for Israel the entire time. From the moment they stepped foot, through the Red Sea and kept on going, God had a path to the promised land for them. And he does for us as well. We call it vision. And we believe that God has a unique vision for every one of his local assemblies worldwide. There's room in the kingdom for every church and every person. And God's vision is big enough that he can reach everybody everywhere for all time through you. And he was waiting for the Israelites to come to this conclusion that what he had was better and that there was a way to get there. And when they finally got to that point, he knew in their hearts, and a generation had passed, that it was time. Then they were able to enter that land. So is the case for your church as well. When you come to this realization that God has a great future and vision for your church, things for you to do if you trust him, the path becomes shorter. The length of time along the path, I think, becomes shorter. And I think, and we've seen this example with churches already, Scott, that have done well through COVID. Maybe not well by every measure or standard that we used to use. But they've continued to increase, and not necessarily numerically, but I think in discipling people, in seeing people come to faith or people mature in their faith. Not every church is not doing well. And the ones that are doing well are still chasing a big vision. And they've realized that even in this season, there's something to be done and that God has a better future for them.
So I think one of the challenging things for a lot of pastors, if I'm just being honest, AJ, is that they have a really hard time seeing it. So I'm having some work done in my backyard. We have just hammered every week on this podcast, I think, my shortcomings and failures. One of them is that I'm not handy, and so I'm having a project done in my backyard. My house is on a hill, AJ, and so I'm having some pavers put in underneath my back patio, and they're having to grade that area so it's flat so that they can have pavers on it. All this to say, I'm having a very difficult time, AJ, visualizing what exactly all of this is going to look like when it's finished. I know that it's going to come together, but I don't know, like, how am I not going to have this steep hill? You know what I mean? Like, I just can't get the thing to come together in my brain on how this is going to work and look, and how my mowing patterns are going to be different and all this, right? And so I think that likewise, some churches are sitting here. Maybe you're listening to this. You're someone listening to this, and you're thinking, okay, all right, so I'm not supposed to wait for the past because the past is the past. I'm not supposed to make camp in the super weird where we're all wearing masks and maybe our church isn't even meeting yet. What does the future look like? So let's set some parameters, and maybe we can just stretch those vision muscles. Every church is different. Every church is unique, so the vision's going to be unique. But let's just play around with this a little bit, AJ, if you're open to it. Yeah. So let's just assume that this is a big assumption, but let's just say within 6 months, there's a vaccine and, the mask thing becomes less required, more optional. Some people are still going to wear them. Some people aren't, but people are not going to be so weird about fist bumps. Maybe we're not all the way to handshakes and hugs, but we're at fist, more comfortable with the fist bump, and we're not so nervous about people being near us. We've gotten some of those things from COVID. Okay, we're more comfortable being in a room with people. Okay, so let's just set that as a prerequisite. We've gotten past that part of this super weird, where we're okay with being with people. What does the future for the church look like? What should be different? What do you feel like are some of these things that could be different?
Yeah, we've kind of mentioned this even in the last few weeks more so. We've been kind of driving people more towards community involvement. So that's definitely one of them. And I know that's a barrier. Some churches feel like that's a barrier right now. Like, well, we can't even go out and do stuff because we can't be with people. And I think in most areas, that's kind of not true. You can be within the vicinity of people and do things that are helpful for people. So this is kind of a big vision piece really for the church. And that's to be out in the world, in the community, and living out really what the church is supposed to be in the world, right? I mean, that's God's vision for the church anyway. That's gotten lost quite a bit over the years. And especially in churches that are finding themselves in trouble, even before COVID, as you said earlier, were plateaued or declining. So I think that's a big vision piece, is reclaiming the church's place in the world. And I'm talking about true hand-to-hand doing things for people in the name of Jesus and bringing the good news, as a part of what you're doing.
Yeah. I think if I could boil it down to 3 things I feel like the church of the future does differently and better than the church of Egypt, so to speak, it'd be these 3 things. Number 1, churches do a better job of by name discipleship, where they know who it is that's part of their church, regardless of their size, whether you're a church of 100 people or 10,000. They do a better job of actually overseeing people's journey, and not just trying to get them in the door on a Sunday morning to absorb some piece of content. Content is so cheap right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's what COVID exposed, is that if your whole thing that you do is just about being a venue for content, that won't fly anymore, because I can get a sermon online. I can download worship music on Spotify. I do not need to go to your church to listen to Christian content.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a shift that the healthy churches will make is away from just producing content. I'm not saying they're not going to preach sermons anymore. Of course they are. But away from valuing the content production and consumption to actually genuinely moving people through a discipleship process and creating the systems and implementing the systems and tracking those systems and seeing where people are at in their journey. I think that the healthy churches pre-COVID were already doing that. But I think moving forward, the promised land looks like by name discipleship that doesn't start and end with people showing up on Sunday. The second thing that I see is churches reinventing what the facility means. I think another thing that has been exposed by COVID, AJ, is the need for third space. People are hungry for a place to go. And so if your church is primarily an auditorium with classroom space, I don't think that people want to be a part of that space. But having open spaces, community spaces, resources for the community that can get used 6 days a week, and you happen to have a multi-purpose room where people can gather for worship is a bonus. I think that that's a shift that churches are going to make. I think that churches should be looking at, in this moment, how could you use your facility to connect remote learner kids, who have parents that work full-time. They need somewhere to take their kids, like open up your building and have volunteers and wear masks and all that stuff, but be safe, but use your space to help the community. I think that would be a second shift. And the third one is what you were talking about, AJ, just becoming an unmistakable blessing to your neighborhood. I mean, if you want to grow in 2020, 2021 and beyond, you can't be so obsessed and worried about your image online. You need to be building your reputation in the community. This is what the Acts 2 church did, right? They grew in favor with all the people because of what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yes, they were preaching the gospel. They were doing evangelism in word, but they were known for doing evangelism in deed. And you need both. You need both. And so it's obviously going to look different from church to church, but man, I think that every church can do these three things, right? We can shift to by name discipleship. We can leverage our facility as a third space, and third space, by the way, meaning not home and not work. You need a third space, and we can make the shift to becoming an unmistakable blessing in our community. I think we can do these things. I think any church could do these things.
Absolutely. Well, today's topic was vision, if you didn't catch that. And we truly believe that God has a unique vision for your church in the place that you are, with the people that you have, with you as the leader, and in this time that we're living in. So our encouragement to you, our prayer for your church, is that you will seek out that vision, that you'll communicate it well, that you'll rally your people around it, and that you'll lead it well to its fulfillment as soon as possible. Be on that short path to the promised land, not the path of 40 years through the desert. All
right. So I think one of the challenges, AJ, as we're listening to this and going, oh man, here are some pivots we can make. And I certainly don't want to camp out in the super weird, and I don't want to go back. I don't want to be waiting around for normal or going back to Egypt. But I don't know how, AJ, sometimes as a pastor, I don't know how to take my church from here to there.
Yeah.
So what could I do that could help me get from here to there?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned kind of being on the shortest path possible. Don't spend 40 years going for it. And we've got a path that probably will get you really, really close to developing the strategies that are going to get you to vision fulfillment in 90 days or less. And we've got a couple of different ways that we do that. Scott and I and our team love working hands-on with churches all over the country. And so that's an option. One of us, we call ourselves guides, and we can guide you to the vision that God has for your church. The other way is through an online method that we have called Church Revitalization University. You can check it out at churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. And right now you can get a free sneak peek at nearly all of that content, so you can decide if it's going to be right for your church or not. It's a way in which you can lead your church, your team of leaders, through pursuing this vision for your church. It's going to walk you through redeveloping your mission, understanding biblical values and what you should be chasing after, establishing a discipleship pathway that'll help you systematically and with the exact outcomes that you want, discipling your people to maturity, and then going after that vision and having the strategies that are going to get you from day one and on into the future. churchrevitalizationuniversity.com is where you need to go. You can read all about it there. We would love to answer any questions you have about it. So be sure and hit us up at leadership@malfirsgroup.com, or just reach out to us on our website. We've got a fun chat feature that we'd love to answer your questions there as well. So you've got about 1 week left. You can kick the tires on Church Revitalization University and then be able to sign up to get your church started next week. So time is running out on that, and the semester will be closed until we offer again in 2021.
Yeah.
So we sure would love for you to check that out and see if it's going to be the right move for your church to pursue this vision.
You know, I just want to say a lot of churches I know are struggling financially right now. COVID hit them. Some your churches are just you're still the giving has been fine all the way through this, and that's fantastic. I even know of a handful of churches where the giving has gone up, which is also fantastic. I'm really glad for you. But there's some of you too where you're like, man, we've had to scale back. We've had to scale back our expenses because cash flow is a problem, and we don't want to lay off staff. And I get all that. You know, PPP saved us for the summer, but now that we're going into the fall, things are really uncertain. And I get that. So I want to say this. If you go to churchrevitalizationuniversity.com and go, man, this would be great, but we don't have the money to do this. We're a nonprofit. We don't want that to be the determining factor for you. So email us, leadership@malfirstgroup.com, and tell us, hey, I want to do this and I want to pay for this, but I can't right now. We just don't have the money. We're not going to let that stop you. Like we don't want money to be the reason why you don't get the help that you need. So shoot us an email and we will work something out with you. And we'll work out a plan that works. But every church should be able to get from the desert to the promised land. And we know from personal experience, AJ, that a process can shorten that journey. And we want to help. We want to help. So go to churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. You have about a week left to sign up. And if you can't do it financially, let us know and we'll work something out with you.
Well, this has been the Church Revitalization Podcast. Again, episode 53, and we are looking forward to having you back again next week with fresh topic for you and intended to be a blessing to your church. Thanks for tuning in.